Welcome to Satluj TV News. You're watching the News Hour with Angus Scott in London. It's Monday the 1st of May. These are the main headlines from around the world. Key IS terrorist leader is killed by Turkish special forces in Syria. The UN sends its top humanitarian representative to Sudan as the country's extended ceasefire struggles to hold. France sees a day of massive protests as Macron struggles to contain civil unrest. The people of Britain are controversially asked to swear allegiance to King Charles at his coronation. And is the humble sloth the key to a new generation of antibiotics? Welcome to the News Hour. These are today's main stories in detail. The suspected leader of the Islamic State group Abu Hussein al-Qurayshi has reportedly been killed in Syria by Turkish special forces over the weekend. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan confirmed over the weekend that the IS leader had been neutralised by the Turkish intelligence agency, the MIT. The special operation took place in the northern town of Jandaris, close to the country's border with Turkey. The terrorist leader had only been in the role for 5 months after his predecessor was killed by the Free Syrian Army last October. Islamic State had previously dominated the country with close to 10,000 soldiers controlling over 8 million people, but has since been driven from the territory, now mainly operating as a guerrilla force based in rural areas. The top United Nations humanitarian official is being sent today to the Sudan region due to the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian crisis in the conflict-racked country. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres announced yesterday that Martin Griffiths, the UN's emergency relief coordinator, will be sent to the area. Sudanese forces have since announced a 72-hour extension to the ceasefire, which up until now they have largely violated, as warplanes roared overhead and fighting continued in the capital Khartoum. Witnesses overnight reported continued clashes as well as fighter jets soaring above various parts of the capital and its twin city Omdurman across the Nile River. France's President Emmanuel Macron faces massive nationwide protests today as he seeks to steer the country on from a divisive pension law that has sparked anger, pan-bashing and social unrest. Last month he signed a law to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, despite months of strikes against the bill. Macron has faced booing and protesters banging pots and pans wherever he goes. France has been rocked by a dozen days of nationwide strikes and protests against Macron and his pension changes since mid-January, some of which have turned violent. 11 people have died after a gas leak in northern India. The leak happened in an industrial area in the city of Ludhiana in Punjab state. At least 9 other people have been taken to hospital. India's National Disaster Response Force has been sent to the area to determine the cause and source of the leak in the densely populated area, which has now been sealed off and residents evacuated. It was reported the 11 who died fell unconscious as they came to buy milk. First responders have speculated the cause was likely gas leaking from beneath manhole covers. A huge fire broke out over the weekend at a fuel depot in Sevastopol, the main port in Moscow-annexed Crimea, with authorities saying it was the result of a drone attack. Sevastopol is home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, which it annexed from Ukraine in 2014. The port has been hit by a series of drone attacks since the Kremlin's offensive on Ukraine launched last year. The fire's size was around 1,000 square metres and as yet there are no reports of injuries. Earlier this week, Russia said it had already repelled a drone attack on the port. Paraguayans have once again elected a president from the right-wing party in power for nearly 8 decades in polls yesterday, rejecting a centre-left challenger who had railed against endemic institutional corruption. Economist and former finance minister Santiago Peña, 44, took the election with more than 42% of the vote to continue the hegemony of the conservative Colorado Party. 60-year-old challenger Efrain Alegre of the Concertación centre-left coalition garnered nearly 27.5% of the vote despite having gone into the vote with a narrow lead in opinion polls. The outcome bucked a recent anti-incumbency trend in Latin American elections, with voters repeatedly punishing establishment parties, often in favour of leftist rivals. At least 10 people were killed overnight when heavily armed assailants opened fire indiscriminately outside a shop in Guayaquil, Ecuador's main port city and economic hub, that is currently under a state of emergency due to rising drug violence. Guayaquil has become one of the country's increasingly bloody centres of a turf war between rival drug trafficking gangs. The port city's position on the Pacific coast makes it a strategic launch point for shipments of drugs to the United States and Europe. The killing is the latest in a recent surge of violence, including gang and cartel-related murders and multiple prison riots and massacres, as authorities crack down on gangs and seize drugs. Polls closed last night across Uzbekistan, ending a day of voting in the Central Asian nation, in a constitutional referendum that could allow President Shavkat Mirziyoyev to remain in power until 2040. Mirziyoyev became president in 2016 after the death of dictator Islam Karimov. He insists the overhaul of the constitution will improve governance and quality of life in the landlocked Central Asian country of 35 million people, whose rights have long been heavily restricted. The constitutional changes would extend presidential terms from 5 to 7 years, allowing him to serve 2 more terms and extend his time in power until 2040. Over the weekend, authorities in Colombia recommended that towns closest to the main crater of the Nevado del Ruiz volcano in the Colombian Andes be vacated ahead of a possible eruption. Seismic activity has increased at the volcano, which killed 25,000 people in an eruption in 1985. That blast was the worst natural disaster in Colombian history and one of the deadliest volcanic eruptions of the 20th century. That eruption generated enough heat to melt the snow on the mountain and triggered a cascading wall of mud that swallowed the town of Armero, killing half of its population of 50,000. All Britons will be called on to swear allegiance to King Charles III at his coronation on May the 6th, an oath hitherto reserved for British nobility, in a move that has upset anti-royalists. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who will lead the coronation ceremony at Westminster Abbey in London, announced that the traditional homage of peers, during which representatives of the nobility kneel before the king and pledge allegiance to him, would be scrapped. Instead, the ceremony will include a homage of the people, with the Archbishop calling on all people in the United Kingdom and other places where King Charles is the head of state to swear allegiance. And finally, could Costa Rican sloths hold the key to a new generation of antibiotics? Scientists are investigating a potential new source to tackle the growing problem of superbugs resistant to humanity's dwindling arsenal of drugs. The fur of Costa Rican sloths appears to harbour antibiotic-producing bacteria that scientists hope may lead them to finding new ways to tackle the problem. The World Health Organization estimates that by 2050, resistance to antibiotics could cause 10 million deaths a year. Antimicrobial resistance is a natural phenomenon, but the overuse and misuse of antibiotics in humans, animals and plants has made the problems worse. You've been watching the News Hour on Satluj TV. Those were a few of today's main stories from around the world. Don't forget you can send us your opinions and thoughts that you may have on any of our news items to our email address, message@satlujtv.com, and we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching. For Satluj TV News, I'm Angus Scott in London.